Sacred Heart is proud to sponsor Pensacola Histories in recognition of the Daughters of Charity who brought their mission of care to Pensacola over 90 years ago.
Hello and welcome to our continuing story of Pensacola, North America's first place city. Today we continue our story of Pensacola in the war between the states. And when we left our story the last time, General Dick Anderson had organized about 1,000 troops from their stations in Fort Barrancas and at the Navy Yard. And these men were to march by night into Pensacola, where they would be boarded on various types of vessels at the Palafox Street dock and carried by water to Santa Rosa Island. And here the troop divided, some of them to march along the Sound, others to march along the Gulf, and they were to attack Fort Pickens. Now, Fort Pickens had by this time a very sizable complement, some of whom were housed in tents, living on the east side of the fort, in a cleared area that had been prepared for this when the fort was built some 40 years before. Well, the landing came late. The arrangement, the estimate of time to move from the Navy Yard area to downtown was far unprepared. They just didn't do a good job of the estimate, so that it was almost midnight when these men finally boarded their vessels. They made the journey to the island, and now they broke out and began marching on each side of the island toward the fort and the tent encampment. And it was at the beginning it was a total surprise. They got right to the edge of the tent city with none of the Federals recognizing them, and they broke in. Well, of course, here misfortune took over for the South, because these were young, inexperienced farm boys, and they could not resist setting fire to things and trying to do a little bit of looting on the side. And that, of course, broke the signal. General Arnold in the fort was quickly advised, and a counterattack began, and slowly the commanding General Anderson recognized that his cause was lost, so they began to retreat. And the Federal boys in pursuit, the Confederates came back toward their vessels, and they took some losses, because the Federals had the advantage of being able to get behind the dunes and fire prone position. And by the time the boys were on the vessels and got back, they had suffered considerably. Well, they got back to Pensacola, of course, and then were marched back to their berths. And the next morning, once again in the city, the mayor and all of the townspeople were they could not believe this. They, can't we do anything right? When is something going to go right for us here at Pensacola? Meanwhile, all they were getting was bad news from up north. The South was losing here and losing there, and they were concerned. Well, we moved forward through this same kind of atmosphere into the month of November. And at this time, and some of the details here are very, very sketchy for us, but we know that the General Bragg was absent on an inspection tour at Mobile, probably at Fort Morgan, and he left General Anderson in command. Now, what caused General Anderson to do this, we still don't know, but he decided it was the better part of valor for them to take action. And they began a bombardment using the cannon in Fort McRae and also in Fort Barrancas against Fort Pickens. Well, Fort Pickens' cannon far outmatched the cannon on the mainland. And so after a few minutes, the North responded, and while the cannon fire went on for about 8 or 9 hours altogether, the results for the Confederacy, for the Navy Yard, and for the little villages of Woolsey and Warrington, where the Navy Yard people lived, it was a disaster. The cannonballs from the South simply bounced off the walls at Fort Pickens. When General Bragg returned, he was absolutely furious. I wish we had a tape recording of some sort of what he said to that other general, but we don't. We can just have to surmise that. And the same sort of situation proceeded on now for about a month. And once again, why this happened on January 1st and 2nd, we don't know. But once again, the South decided to bombard Fort Pickens, and they did. Maybe it was out of total frustration. They just so desperately wanted to get control of that fort, and everything so far had failed. But once again, the bombardment of January was a failure. Well, as all of this is taking place, of course, the activities in the field to the north of us here were not going well for the South. And by the time we get to the early days of February, it is pretty obvious that the South, even with as many as 6,000 men here, had no way to capture Fort Pickens and so make Pensacola an open thoroughfare for supplies. And as a result of that, word comes down to General Bragg on the 12th day of February that he is to begin to withdraw his troops from Pensacola. Well, Bragg very wisely calls in all of the leaders of the county and the city and explains his position. And they literally plead with him. Look, think of what's going to happen. While the Yankees are off there, who knows what they will do to us when they move in here? Can you stall? Can you make this a progressive withdrawal? Give us time to make arrangements for moving our families and our fortunes away from Pensacola to somewhere where we will be safe. Well, Bragg did a very good job of making these arrangements. So basically, it took almost 3 months for all of this to transpire. And we've reached now the first days of May, and by now most of the people of the city of Pensacola have left. They have gone to relatives in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. All of them, of course, they've traveled, some of them on the railroad as far as they could. Others had gone by cart and by wagon, by horseback. I suppose some of them even walked. But nonetheless, the city's population was dwindling by the day. And we come to the 7th, 8th, and 9th of May, and now the word goes out from General Bragg through his colonels and to another general who is now with them, that the word now is everything that is here that might be used to aid or comfort the enemy must be destroyed. That meant the lumber mills, the turpentine mills, the inventories, the warehouses, the Navy Yard in particular. Anything there that might aid the enemy had to be put to the torch. And so beginning on the 8th day of May, all of that begins. And that not only included Pensacola, that included the Navy, the shipbuilding forces, and the beautiful Navy lumber yards up and down the Blackwater River. All of these were burned without exception. Some people know, of course, about the story of Pensacola and its chimney along Scenic Highway. That was a mill. And in the days that we're talking about, the owners of the mill decided, well, we don't want the equipment, the valuable capital equipment, to fall into the Yankees' hands. So they put it on barges of some sort and attempted to carry it across the bay to some point of safety. Unfortunately, it was a fairly turbulent May. The waves came up, and the story we have anyway is that the vessel that carried the equipment sank and it was lost. The chimney itself, of course, well, we all know that it's still standing there as a monument to the past. Well, we come to the morning of the 9th of May. At this point in time, General Bragg's final soldiers are about to embark on the railroad. They're going to go north to Pollard Junction, and a few civilians are allowed to get on that railroad. There's just enough room for a few of them, and they start out. And as they move to the north, they stop every 100 yards or so. They tear up the rails, burn the ties, use the fire to literally heat and bend the rails so they would not be usable to the Yankees, and the railroad continued on. So that we can say that by the end of the evening of May the 9th, 1862, the Alabama and Florida Railroad had ceased to exist. It was gone, and we would not see it again for, well, basically 8.5 years. As this happened, of course, Pensacola was left defenseless. Immediately, we have a movement into the community here. We have a military, an Army lieutenant, and then Lieutenant David Porter of the Navy. Both of them move in, and they declare martial law. Now, as they do this, of course, the story moves on that what are we going to do with the people who are here? There aren't many left. As it turns out, perhaps at that point, about 100. And so they bring together the leadership of the community. The city council itself is gone. They have left an appointed mayor to take care of things as people arrived, as the Federals arrived. We must tell you, too, that the city council did something rather unique, but just before this critical day. They didn't know quite what to do with themselves. So they had talked to the governor, Madison Perry, and said, "What may we become a council in exile and continue our operations?" Well, the governor sort of scratched his head on that. He'd never heard of a city council in exile, but he said as far as he was concerned, that was fine. And so they agreed that they would move. They made arrangements to take themselves and their families to Greenville, Alabama. And they then turned to their city clerk, a man named John De La Rua, and made an arrangement with him that he would be in charge of safeguarding all of the city's records. And Mr. De La Rua agreed that he would do this for $100 per month. And he did. He took all the records. He got some large earthenware jars and put the records in them and buried them. And he remained in Pensacola, just sort of keeping a weather eye on them. And the records were protected. And when, of course, some years later, when the city council council came back. Mr. De La Rua very proudly dug up the jars, presented the records to him, and the city council properly compensated him as they said they would. They paid him, this is in 1865, 66, they paid him off in Confederate money. The De La Rua family, I believe today, is still a little disturbed about that. Well, in the Navy, in the Pensacola itself, a number of the men who were here elected to sign a document saying that they would support the federal union. They were not going to take arms against it again. But a few of them would not. And one of those involved in this was a man named Lucius Merritt. Merritt had been back and forth with his family a number of times. The family had fled, but he had remained here to take care of his business interests, and he was one of those arrested in the martial law roundup. And Mr. Merritt was taken by boat with about a dozen others out to Fort Pickens, where they became prisoners of war for the next 3 months. And there's an interesting story about this. Mr. Merritt was a very loving family man, so he tried hard to correspond with his family, whose members were up in Georgia. And so he wrote letters back and forth, and a few of the letters in response did get through to him by some miracle. And some years later, a descendant of his, a young lady by the name of Merritt Nickinson, put all of those letters together in a beautiful little booklet, which she entitled "Kiss the Children for Father." And it gives you, the beauty of this is it gives you an insight into what it was like for a man like Merritt, a leading businessman, to be a prisoner of war living in Fort Pickens. And actually, he says, I was not badly treated. The things were not bad, and they released us by the end of September, and Merritt, of course, went his way, ultimately coming back here at the end of the war. Well, as all of the action took place, as the Federals moved in, the first thing they did, of course, was to move out to the Navy Yard, because they wanted to see, is there any way that they could make that facility available to northern military vessels? And they lucky for them, perhaps with great foresight, they had some capital equipment, some lathes and tools of that kind on several of their ships, and those materials were brought in, placed in the Navy Yard, so that within a matter of weeks it was usable. Not as it had been, of course, but it was usable, and this would come back into our story just a little bit later. Well, the rest of the town, it was gone. And of course, when that happened, the story of the South began to recede as far as Pensacola was concerned. For the next 3 years, we would be literally the end of the story. We had federal troops here. They occupied all of the forts and the settlements. Basically, there are lots of rumors that come along about what happened in those days. Some stories were written by back in the 1880s and 90s about how the Federals moved in and they were vandals. They did this to churches. They did all sorts of terrible things. But other stories come along and say that wasn't true at all. The Federals were relatively careful of what they did. We can find no record of serious damage of any public building, and certainly they did not go around burning things down. There's one story, for example, where one federal captain was very much afraid of an attack by someone. I can't imagine who it might have been, but was afraid of this, that might happen, and that they might attack and use St. Michael's Cemetery and the tombstones there as security and safety. And so he ordered his men to knock the tombstones down so this couldn't happen. And the story goes that the enlisted men said, well, yes, sir, we'll take care of that just as soon as you're gone. And of course, they never touched a stone. So there are little things like that that help tell our story that it was one of compassion. The town was not abused. Yes, the buildings went unpainted. Things were not good. And there were only, at actual count by one census that was done, about 75 people remained here and remained through the balance of the war. And that was the end of the story. Pensacola itself remained a ghost town, and the people would not begin to return here until after Appomattox, and that, of course, takes us well into 1865.